Hello, thanks for joining. The decarbonisation of domestic heat represents a complex challenge here in Scotland and nationally, which will impact on all consumers in different ways and to varying degrees. Identifying and unpacking the likely impacts that decarbonisation of heating will have for consumers is key to planning and delivering the transition from fossil fuels in a fair and just way. Changeworks, which is Scotland's leading charity for low carbon living, works across these areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about the likely impacts of decarbonisation on people and the more vulnerable in society, and my colleague Lauren will discuss how consumer protection can be achieved and assured. We recently did some research to assess the distributional impacts of decarbonisation on Scottish consumers, particularly vulnerable consumers. We identified the consumer impacts for potential scenarios for decarbonisation, green gas, electrification, hybrid heat systems, heat networks, and biomass. A wide range of impacts for consumers were considered across the different stages of the transition, such as the disruption during the installation of new systems, changes in consumers' heating experiences, and the risk of market vulnerability and harm. Benefits and drawbacks were found for all the scenarios, however this distribution of impacts was unequal across consumer groups. We found that across all heating scenarios, the most vulnerable consumers are at highest risk of being further disadvantaged. Those with reduced capacity or increased needs owing to age, physical or mental health concerns, disability or poverty could be further disadvantaged by decarbonisation unless effective provisions are in place. Additionally, the benefits which some of the scenarios provide will be felt most by those with pre-existing advantages, such as education, higher income, engagement with the energy sector, and the absence of additional needs. Therefore, there's a significant risk that the energy transition will widen and entrench existing inequalities. The most common risk appears to be linked with higher costs, as well as the health and well-being impacts of increased financial pressure. The risk of or severity of fuel poverty could also be heightened. The following example involved primary research with vulnerable consumers, which brings this into sharp focus. So this research is currently being done in collaboration with the distribution company SGN to understand how decarbonisation is considered by some of those who are most likely to be negatively impacted by any transition to low carbon. Respondents felt that most of the aspects related to the installation of the new heating systems would be of concern to them. What's noticeable is that all the bars in the left-hand graph exceed 3 out of 5, indicating how concerning they are felt to be. As is often the case, money is the most pressing concern for all three of the groups that we have spoken to so far. Being able to keep homes warm is the second most pressing concern, followed by knowing where to access advice and support. Households with such high concerns, paired with the stresses and vulnerabilities they already face, mean that it'll be of vital importance to work with charities and organisations that are already trusted and supportive of vulnerable households, as indicated in the graph on the right-hand side. This graph shows consumer organisations and charities being the most trusted sources, while the order of these bars is as would be expected, with advice organisations being considered more trustworthy than social media. What's noticeable here is that other than the top two choices, all the others scored under 2.5 in aggregate scores, i.e. they're considered not particularly trustworthy regarding energy and heating. Effective communication needs a trusted messenger who shares the values and understands the needs of their audiences. Language which is delivered by a trusted peer is likely to be far more effective than if it comes from an outsider. As mentioned above, working alongside trusted charities will be extremely beneficial for campaign messages.
This is one of 8 customer archetypes which we based our research on. And this example represents very low income, older single adult households who are living in urban areas experiencing high levels of fuel poverty. Most of the consumers in this group will be transitioning from gas central heating, which will be a disruptive and expensive process, both in terms of capital investment and also running costs. They will face disruption in the home to install a new heating system and in the local area as electricity distribution systems will need to be upgraded. These network upgrades are likely to have the most impact on people in a densely populated urban area. Due to the higher than average energy efficiency levels of properties and the likelihood of longer hours of occupancy, this group will be well placed to benefit from the continuous and low level heat from heat pumps. However, without support and funding, the capital costs of the heat pumps are likely to be prohibitive, as these customers are mostly owner-occupiers on very low incomes. These householders are also more likely to transition to resistive heating, such as storage heaters or panel heaters, rather than to heat pumps, meaning they are likely to face higher fuel bills. If appropriate funding and support mechanisms are put in place to help with purchasing heat pumps, this consumer group are unlikely to take advantage of these due to their low levels of market engagement. The consumers might also be at high risk of mis-selling of electric heating technologies due to lower engagement levels, their age profile, and above average levels of illness or disability. These factors also mean consumers are likely to pay more for their electricity, which combined with very low incomes could increase fuel poverty levels. A big part of the road to decarbonisation is the need to retrofit the vast majority of homes in Scotland to improve their energy efficiency. This will require a lot of householders to engage with this process, some perhaps for the first time. There are a number of potential gaps in existing policies which could expose these consumers to risk, especially those who are most vulnerable. Consumer protection is therefore essential to avoid the widening of inequalities due to the energy transition. Changeworks have recently conducted several pieces of research around protecting consumers through this energy transition. One of which was a piece which Citizens Advice Scotland commissioned us to research around the current protection available for consumers in energy efficiency and renewable retrofit markets for Scotland. We identified through this research considerable gaps across the customer journey, and some of the issues we identified were around mis-selling, a lack of independent checks and quality control, and warranties being invalidated as consumers were not made aware of maintenance requirements. We also identified that a two-tier system of protection seems to be emerging, where those who access retrofit measures through funding schemes typically have a higher protection than those who are funding the measures themselves. The impacts of the gaps in protections are wide-ranging for consumers and included debt or financial loss, inability to insure homes, issues caused by poor installation such as damp and mould, unusable or ineffective heating systems, and a loss of deposit due to rogue installers or companies going bust. Regardless of the decarbonisation strategy, almost all routes will result in additional costs for vulnerable people. It is clear from our research that decarbonisation could increase such risks or divides, but it also has the potential to reduce them. To make decarbonisation fair, a lot of work is required to support people, especially with the impact of COVID-19. A lot more people are going to find themselves in vulnerable categories. Consumer protection must therefore work to bridge existing consumer gaps and not just prevent them from widening. Based on recent research projects, we have made several recommendations to Scottish Government. In particular, there needs to be more focus on raising awareness of the concerns of vulnerable people, especially as our research highlighted that all aspects are a concern to vulnerable groups. The groups that we've identified as being vulnerable need to be supported. To do this, work needs to be delivered through cross-sectorial support, in particular those organisations who are not currently seen as trusted organisations in the field of decarbonisation. These include energy suppliers, local councils and government. Trusted organisations such as charities need to be better resourced so that they are equipped to provide this support. With regards to consumer protection, in order to protect customers during their retrofit journey, a number of steps need to be taken to provide support and guidance throughout the process. In the published report available on the Changeworks website, we've outlined these steps in more detail, but some of the key recommendations are that there needs to be a collective support package where agencies who provide advice work together to make sure that this advice is consistent. Greater independent checks are needed for guarantee and consumer or technical code organisations and their blacklisting practices, and improved information sharing between agencies to help us to be able to tackle and identify road traders. Changeworks work across a range of projects related to energy efficiency, decarbonisation and fuel poverty. If you'd like to know more about any of the projects mentioned or to discuss other work, please feel free to contact us. Our email addresses are on this slide. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.